President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden held simultaneous rallies in Iowa yesterday, with both campaigning like it's already 2020. The two traded attacks in what could be a preview of a contentious presidential election should Biden secure the Democratic nominee slot. Here's some of what they had to say about each other.
I believe that the president is literally an existential threat to America.
I'd rather run against, I think, Biden than anybody. I think he's the weakest mentally.
Sleepy Joe. He was someplace in Iowa today, and he said my name so many times that people couldn't stand it anymore.
This is a guy who does everything to separate and frighten people.
Joe Biden thought that China was not a competitor of ours. Joe Biden is a dummy.
Iowa farmers have been crushed by his tariff war with China.
And Elena Schneider is a national political reporter at Politico. She joins me from Arlington, Virginia. Elena, welcome. Great to have you with us. So Joe Biden may want to compete against President Trump, but he still has to fend off 23 other Democrats. What is the rationale behind focusing on the president here?
Well, look, I think that both Trump and Biden see this as politically advantageous to them to go ahead and already focus on the general election. For Biden, it's a matter of ignoring those more liberal candidates or those lesser-known candidates that might pull him to the left on a number of issues that he doesn't necessarily want to address or be pointed out to primary voters, that he's maybe not quite as progressive on. And for Trump, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, just in the context for Trump, he already is starting to roll out similar attacks against Biden that he used during 2016, already talking about how Biden is related to crooked Hillary in his words. So I think that he's really trying to use this already as a means to speed ahead and use sort of lines of attack that really worked effectively in 2016 that he hopes again will work in 2020.
So, Elena, President Trump's campaign manager, Brad Parscale, told CBS News that President Trump is fiery this morning over what his campaign believes are unfair polls showing him trailing 6 Democrats nationally. Here's how he addressed those polls at the White House today.
We have great internal polling. They were fake polls that were released by somebody that it's ridiculous. No, we are winning in every single state that we've polled. We're winning in Texas very big. We're winning in Ohio very big. We're winning in Florida very big. They were fake polls that were either put out by the corrupt media, because much of the media in this country, unfortunately, is corrupt. I have to tell you that, Mr. President. And some of it is excellent, but some is very bad. Those are fake numbers. But you know when you're going to see that? You're going to see that on Election Day.
So, Elena, how seriously should the public take these kinds of polls this far out?
Well, look, polling this far out is going to be very fluid. We're going to see it shift and change over the next several months, not only for a general election matchup, but even amongst these primary candidates. Those polls are going to change. But ultimately, polls are a snapshot for where the electorate is in this moment in time. And as much as President Trump would like to dismiss what he's seeing coming out of some of these states, trailing a number of these Democratic presidential candidates already in some key battleground states, that means that he's probably not doing as well in those places. So look, I think that it's a warning for him, and one that he doesn't necessarily publicly would like to acknowledge, but certainly privately is something that they're taking very seriously and that Democrats, in fact, are quite excited about.
All right, meanwhile, there is a clip I'd like to play from Senator Kamala Harris talking about how she would prosecute President Trump if she's elected into the White House. Let's listen.
You have been very clear that you want impeachment proceedings to begin. If you become president, if he was never impeached, would you want the Department of Justice, now that he is no longer a sitting president, to go forward with those obstruction of justice charges?
I believe that they would have no choice and that they should, yes. There has to be accountability. I mean, look, people might, question why I became a prosecutor. Well, I'll tell you, one of the reasons I believe there should be accountability. Everyone should be held accountable, and the president is not above the law.
So President Obama declined to prosecute members of the Bush administration over the Iraq war, even though a lot of Democrats were calling for that. So how big of a break from tradition would this be?
I think it's certainly a break from tradition, but one that Harris is willing and wants to make, in part because this is really red meat news for liberal voters who want to see this president prosecuted in some form. And if it's not going to necessarily come through impeachment proceedings, that they want to see him be held accountable, in the words of Kamala Harris. And so I think that this is a way for her to distinguish herself from the rest of the field, leaning on her own prosecutorial credentials, as she said, and also point out, look, I'm even willing to go further in addressing these concerns around this president than maybe even some of her Democratic primary opponents are willing to say as of yet. So it's just sort of another example of how far she's saying she's willing to go to hold this president accountable.
All right, Elena. Another Democratic candidate, Bernie Sanders, is holding a speech today to pitch the public on democratic socialism, which gained some popularity after his unsuccessful 2016 run. What is democratic socialism exactly, and how does it explain Bernie Sanders?
Well, I think, look, we're gonna really be excited to hear what he has to say in this speech. But it is speeches still that he has given in the past. He did something similar before his run in 2015, trying to lay out that socialism, in his mind and in his words, isn't a scary or a dirty word. It's one that tracks back in his mind back to FDR and sort of the unfinished business coming out of the New Deal. This sort of idea that democratic liberalism that's reaching out to people who are particularly low income and communities of color and trying to lift up everyone. This really fits into his overall rationale for why he wants to run for president. The problem is that he has a branding problem around that. Democratic socialism is a word that's quite controversial, and in fact is very unpopular, particularly among older voters who see this and who remember the Cold War and remember sort of much more negative associations with the word socialism. And so he's really trying to give this speech as a means of rebranding this term so that it's one that he can sort of reassign a definition to and therefore make maybe a little less concerning for some of those older voters who are obviously a huge constituency in both a primary and a general election.
And a lot of voters that are going to have to be won over. All right, so we're also getting a new poll from the early primary state of Nevada today. Since the first since March, Joe Biden leads the pack with 36%, and Elizabeth Warren has jumped into second with 19%. Are we seeing her move past Bernie Sanders in the horse race?
Well, look, Nevada is a particularly difficult state to poll, but I do think that these are numbers that her and her team are incredibly excited about, in part because it's showing the momentum that Warren has been able to leapfrog over Bernie Sanders in at least one of these early states. And it's still, as we sort of said at the top of the show, it's still fluid, and these poll numbers are still going to move. But it's a reflection of the energy that she's been able to build out, particularly in the last couple of months, sort of rallying around this idea of she's got a plan, of Warren's got a plan. And that's one that she's really been able to lean into and maybe draw some contrast and difference from Bernie Sanders.
Elena Schneider of Politico, we thank you.
Thank you.